They trained you to chase, and now you're quiet, and suddenly the avoidant is the one feeling ignored, and this keynote hooks the viewer because it flips the power dynamic in one sentence. Most people click this video while they're still stuck in the old position, overthinking, checking their phone, replaying conversations, wondering why the avoidant can pull away so easily. They feel like the avoidant holds all the power, because the avoidant controls distance. The avoidant decides when to appear and disappear. The avoidant decides when the relationship feels warm and when it feels cold. So when you open by saying the tables have turned, you're not just telling a story. You're giving the viewer a new identity, the identity of the person who stopped begging and started choosing peace. Ladies and gentlemen, they trained you to chase is not an insult, it's a description of conditioning. Conditioning happens when a pattern repeats so many times that your nervous system learns it like a rule. The avoidant withdraws, you feel panic, you reach out, they respond just enough to calm you, then they withdraw again. That cycle teaches your body that chasing is the only way to restore safety. Your brain starts associating silence with danger and contact with relief. So you chase, not because you're weak, but because your system is trying to survive uncertainty. And the avoidant benefits from that conditioning. Because when you chase, they don't have to do the hard work of repair. When you chase, they don't have to face consequences. When you chase, they can stay in control of distance and still keep emotional access to you. That's why the avoidant looks calm, their strategy is working. Your pursuit becomes their reassurance. So what changes when you get quiet? The viewer might think quiet means you're playing games. But this keynote establishes something deeper. Your quiet isn't a tactic, it's a turning point. It's the moment you stop feeding the pattern that kept you anxious. It's the moment you stop giving free emotional labor. It's the moment you stop proving your worth to someone who keeps making you feel uncertain. That quiet is not emptiness, it's self-respect. And that's why the avoidant starts feeling ignored. Not because you suddenly became cruel, but because your behavior stopped being predictable. In the old dynamic, the avoidant could withdraw and expect you to react. Your reaction was part of their rhythm. Your reaction was the rope that kept them tethered without having to step fully in. But when you stop reacting, the rope disappears. And now they feel something they weren't prepared for, the consequence of distance. This is where the hook becomes magnetic for the viewer, because it answers a question they've been living with. Why do they only care when I stop caring? The reason is that avoidants often confuse access with safety. They feel safe when they know you're still there. They feel safe when they know they can return. They feel safe when they know your love is still available, even if they aren't showing up consistently. So your chasing becomes proof that they still have you, and proof calms their nervous system. But when you go quiet, proof disappears. They no longer know where they stand. They no longer know if you're waiting. They no longer know if you're done. And for a person who regulates by controlling distance, losing that control can create a sudden internal alarm. The avoidant may not express it like anxiety, but it shows up as restlessness, checking your social media, sudden curiosity, hovering, or small breadcrumbs. They're trying to regain a sense of access because access restores control and control restores safety. So this keynote doesn't just flip the table, it explains the psychology behind the flip. It tells the viewer, the avoidant isn't necessarily becoming more loving overnight, they are becoming more activated because the system changed. Distance used to produce relief, now distance produces uncertainty, and uncertainty is uncomfortable for them. Now, the most important part of this keynote is the warning hidden inside it. The viewer is going to feel powerful hearing that the avoidant now feels ignored, but the goal is not to punish the avoidant. The goal is not to make them suffer. The goal is to stop ignoring yourself, because some viewers will hear this and think, good, let them hurt. But revenge keeps you tied to the same person emotionally. Self-respect sets you free. So this keynote must teach the right kind of quiet. Quiet that is calm, not cruel. Quiet that is grounded, not performative. Quiet that comes after clarity, not instead of it. Quiet that says, I'm not going to chase, not, I'm going to punish. Because manipulation silence and self-respect silence are not the same, and the viewer needs to understand that the tables turn in a healthy way only when your silence is rooted in boundaries. And here's the final reason this keynote keeps people watching. It creates suspense about what happens next. If the avoidant is feeling ignored, how do they react? Do they come back with honesty or breadcrumbs? Do they step up or test the door? Do they repair or repeat? The viewer stays because they want to know, if I stop chasing, will they come back? And if they do, how do I respond without losing my power? So the first keynote sets the emotional stage. You are not powerless. The tables can turn the moment you stop participating in the chase. But the real victory is not that they feel ignored, The real victory is that you finally stop being trained by their distance, and you start living from your own standard, where love is not something you have to earn through anxiety. In avoidant dynamics, ignored doesn't mean you're being cruel, it means you stop being available on demand, and this keynote changes everything because it reframes the entire story. Most people hear, they feel ignored, and immediately picture you doing something harsh, silent treatment, petty games, revenge. But what's actually happening is much cleaner. You stop performing emotional availability for someone who was inconsistent with you. You stopped being the person who replies instantly, reassures endlessly, explains your feelings in paragraphs, and absorbs the confusion just to keep the connection alive. And the reason it feels like ignored to the avoidant is because they were used to having access without effort. Ladies and gentlemen, an avoidant often experiences love through control of distance, not because they're evil, but because distance is how they regulate discomfort. If closeness rises, they pull away. If feelings get intense, they go quiet. If accountability is required, they disappear. And over time, your nervous system gets trained to respond to that distance by chasing, fixing, softening, apologizing, overgiving. You don't do it because you're weak. You do it because you're trying to restore safety. You're trying to stop the uncertainty from eating you alive. But that's exactly why this keynote hits so hard. Because the moment you stop being available on demand, the avoidant feels something they don't like feeling, a loss of control. They interpret your calm boundary as rejection. They interpret your silence as power being taken away. Not because you announced it, but because your behavior changed the rules. The old rule was, I can pull away and they'll pull me back. The new rule becomes, if I pull away, I might actually lose them. That's why ignored is often just consequence, because what you call basic respect, they call pressure. What you call communication, they call intensity. What you call consistency, they call expectations. And when you stop being available to soothe their discomfort, they label it as you ignoring them because they're not used to earning access. They're used to you providing it. So what does available on demand look like? It looks like you replying even when you're exhausted. It looks like you responding to breadcrumbs like they're a full meal. It looks like you accepting vague check-ins instead of real conversations. It looks like you making space for them even when they don't make space for you. It looks like you being the one to restart the connection after every shutdown. It looks like you taking the emotional responsibility for two people while they take responsibility for none. And when you stop doing that, it feels like the relationship went quiet. But it didn't go quiet because love died. It went quiet because your unpaid emotional labor stopped. This keynote also explains why an avoidant may suddenly become reactive when you detach. They might start hovering. They might watch your stories. They might send a random hey. They might act annoyed like you're the one who changed. They might say, why are you acting like this? They might accuse you of ignoring them. But what they're really saying is, why aren't you doing the job you used to do, the job of keeping me comfortable while I stay inconsistent? Because when you were available on demand, they didn't have to feel the cost of their behavior. They could disappear and still have you. They could delay and still be welcomed. They could keep things undefined and still get loyalty. Your availability made their patterns survivable, and survivable patterns repeat. So the turning point is not you becoming cold. The turning point is you becoming structured. It's you becoming a person with standards. It's you saying through behavior, I'm not here to be accessed whenever you feel like it. I'm here to be respected consistently. Now, here's where many people misunderstand and accidentally turn this into a game. They think, I'll ignore them, so they chase. That's manipulation silence, and it's unstable. It keeps you emotionally tethered, watching, counting, waiting for them to react. But self-respect silence is different. Self-respect silence is when you've already been clear, and you refuse to keep chasing someone into basic decency. It's not performed. It's not dramatic. It's simply you returning to your life. And the reason this works psychologically is because it forces a decision. When you're no longer available on demand, they have to choose. Either they step up with clarity and effort, or they fade because they were never here for real intimacy. They were here for comfort and control. That's why the viewer stays engaged with this keynote, because it answers the haunting question. Why do they care only when I pull away? They don't always care because they suddenly matured. They care because the dynamic changed. Your boundary created uncertainty, and uncertainty activates them. But the deeper empowerment is this: you don't measure your value by their reaction to losing access. You measure your value by how peaceful you feel when you stop overgiving. If they feel ignored because you stop being available on demand, that reveals something important. It reveals they were benefiting from a version of you that was always reachable, always forgiving, always waiting. And if they cannot handle a version of you that has boundaries, then they were not attached to intimacy, they were attached to access. So the correct lesson is not gnaw them back. The correct lesson is stop being available without being respected. Because the moment you stop being on demand, you stop being controlled by their distance. And that's when the tables truly turn, not because they suffer, but because you finally stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. They can't predict you anymore, you removed the safety net. And this keynote is where the viewer finally understands why the avoidant starts feeling gnawed. The moment you detach. Because in most avoidant dynamics, the avoidant isn't just attached to you, they are attached to the rhythm. They are attached to knowing how you will react. They are attached to the control of distance. And that control is what keeps them emotionally regulated. Ladies and gentlemen, predictability is a form of safety. When an avoidant knows that you will chase after silence, they feel safer pulling away. When they know you will forgive quickly, they feel safer being inconsistent. When they know you will accept breadcrumbs, they feel safer giving them. Not because they're consciously trying to hurt you, but because your predictable response lowers their internal anxiety. Your predictability becomes the cushion that protects them from consequence. That cushion is the safety net. And the safety net is usually your emotional labor. Your emotional labor is the long explanations, the reassurance, the patience that becomes self-abandonment, the way you keep the connection alive when they withdraw. You become the one who manages the relationship's stability. You become the one who fixes tension. You become the one who keeps the door open even after disrespect. In many cases, you become the relationship's nervous system. So what happens when you remove it? At first, it looks like nothing. You go quiet. You stop chasing, you stop explaining, you stop reaching. And the avoidant may actually enjoy it for a moment because space is their comfort zone. They may tell themselves, good, no pressure. They may feel relief. But then something changes because relief depends on one assumption, that you're still there, that you're quiet but still attached, that you're not going anywhere, that the door is still open. When they can't confirm that assumption, the relief turns into uncertainty. Uncertainty is what flips the dynamic, because now they can't predict you. Now they don't know if the old script still works. Now they don't know if pulling away will still produce your pursuit. Now they don't know if the come back later strategy will still be available. And that's when the avoidant starts feeling ignored, not because you ignored them, but because they can't control the rhythm anymore. Ladies and gentlemen, people who regulate through control often panic when control disappears. Even if they look calm on the outside, something becomes restless on the inside. Their mind starts scanning for signals. They start checking your social media. They start noticing whether you're online. They start remembering how available you used to be. They start replaying moments. They start thinking, what if I went too far? What if they're done? What if they found someone else? That's not always love. That's loss of control meeting consequence. So the viewer needs to understand the avoidant sense of being ignored is often their nervous system experiencing the same uncertainty they gave to you. They are tasting the discomfort of not knowing. They are tasting what it feels like when access is not guaranteed. And because they're not used to sitting in that discomfort, they often move to restore control. How do they restore control? They test. They send a small message to see if you respond. They react to a story to see if you engage. They ask a random question to see if you answer. They circle back with nostalgia to see if your heart is still open. This is why the safety net matters. When you used to respond, the test would work. They would regain control. They would feel relief. Their nervous system would calm, and then once calm returned, they would often slip back into distance because the urgency disappeared. But when the safety net is removed, their tests might not work the same way, and that creates escalation. They may test again. They may become more emotional. They may become more frequent. They may even become annoyed or accusatory. Why are you ignoring me? Because annoyance is often a cover for anxiety. Accusation is often a way to regain moral superiority so they don't have to admit vulnerability. So this keynote is not just psychology, it's protection for the viewer. It tells the viewer, don't confuse their sudden attention with a sudden transformation. Sometimes it's just them trying to restore the old rhythm where they had control. And if you rush to soothe them, you rebuild the safety net. You teach them, a small test gets full access. You remove consequence again, and then the cycle restarts. So what should the viewer do instead? Stay steady, not cold steady. Steady means you don't punish them, but you don't reward tests with full emotional availability. You respond calmly. You pace, you require clarity. You don't turn your boundary into drama, but you don't collapse either. Because the goal is not to make them chase, the goal is to make the truth visible. This is the key point. Removing the safety net is not a trick to get them back. It's a way to reveal what they actually want. If they want real connection, they will step into real communication. They will be willing to talk about what happened. They will be willing to show consistent effort. They will be willing to respect your boundaries without punishing you for having them. If they only wanted the old pattern, they will avoid clarity. They will keep things vague. They will hover, test, disappear, return, repeat. Because they're not trying to build intimacy, they're trying to restore control. And that's why this keynote keeps viewers watching, because it creates a clear question. What happens when you remove the safety net? Do they rise or do they repeat? The table turns not because you become colder, but because you finally stop being predictable in the one way that kept you stuck, chasing their distance. When you remove the safety net, you stop being managed by their rhythm, and you become the person who sets the pace, the standards, and the conditions for access. First confusion, then scanning for access, then replay, then anxiety. And this keynote is powerful because it turns the avoidance, I feel ignored, into a predictable sequence. Most viewers feel like the avoidant is random, hot one day, cold the next, and when you're living inside that uncertainty, your mind goes crazy trying to interpret every small signal. This keynote calms the viewer because it gives them a map, and a map creates power. When you can recognize the stage, you stop panicking. You stop reacting. You stop resetting the cycle with your own anxiety. Ladies and gentlemen, the first stage is confusion, and confusion begins when your behavior breaks the script. Avoidants are used to distance working. They pull away, you chase. They delay, you explain. They get cold, you warm it up. So when you don't do that, they don't instantly feel heartbreak, they feel confusion. They think, what's going on? Why are they different? Are they mad? Are they playing a game? Are they over it? This confusion is uncomfortable because it removes predictability. They can't regulate by assuming you'll respond. They can't soothe themselves with certainty. So they move into stage 2, scanning for access. Scanning is the avoidance way of restoring control without risking vulnerability. They don't come forward with a full apology, because that would expose them. Instead, they check for signs that the door is still open. They watch your stories. They notice if you're online. They like a post. They react with an emoji. They send a casual hey. They ask a pointless question. They do something small, not because it's meaningful, but because it's safe. It's a test. It's them saying, let me see if I still have access without stepping into accountability. And this is where most viewers get rehooked, because a small signal feels like a breakthrough when you've been starving. Your heart says, they're coming back. Your nervous system says, relief. And the moment you flood them with warmth, the scanning turns into relief for them too. They regain control, they learn. I still have them. And if you respond with full access too quickly, the pattern is reinforced. But if your silence remains steady, scanning can lead to stage 3, replay. Replay happens when their tests don't instantly restore comfort, or when their internal discomfort grows. Replay is the mind revisiting what happened. It's them remembering moments they avoided. It's them recalling your patience. It's them hearing your words again, the ones they dismissed. It's them noticing the impact of their distance now that you're not cushioning it. And replay is where guilt can begin to appear, because replay forces them to look at themselves. Replay is also where the truth splits into 2 paths. Some avoidants replay and feel remorse. I hurt them. I took them for granted. I was unfair. Others replay and start building a defense story. They're too sensitive. They're trying to control me. They're punishing me, because defense is easier than shame. So the viewer must not just notice replay, they must watch what replay produces, accountability or blame. Then comes stage 4, anxiety, the anxiety they didn't expect. Avoidants often believe they can detach forever. They think they're immune to panic. But that confidence was built on access. They could detach because they believed the option would remain. Your silence threatens the option. And when the option feels threatened, anxiety appears. Their anxiety is not always emotional crying, it's restlessness, it's sudden curiosity, it's urgency, it's checking your online status, it's reaching out again, it's more frequent messages, it's even irritation. Why are you acting like this? Because irritation can be a mask for panic. This anxiety is where the avoidant starts trying harder, but again, the viewer must be careful. Trying harder can still be control. An avoidant may push for a quick reset. Let's just move on. Why are you making it a big deal? Can we just go back to normal? Because normal is where they had control. Normal is where they could withdraw and still be welcomed. So what does this map teach the viewer to do? It teaches them to stop responding to stages if they're proof of change. Confusion isn't change. Scanning isn't change. Replay isn't change. Anxiety isn't change. These are internal reactions to loss of control. Change begins only when the avoidant moves from testing to owning. from hovering to communicating, from vague to clear, from guilt to repair. And that's why the viewer's most powerful response is calm structure. If they send a breadcrumb, you don't bite like you're starving. You respond like someone who knows the pattern: warm but paced, kind but clear. You can say, I'm open to a real conversation, but I'm not going back to inconsistency. If you want to reconnect, it needs to be respectful and clear. That sentence forces the avoidant out of scanning and into accountability. If they're ready, they'll step in. If they're not, they'll disappear. And either way, you win clarity. So this keynote keeps the audience engaged because it's not just theory, it's a roadmap that helps them stop being emotionally played by the cycle. It teaches them that the table's turning is not the end, it's the beginning of truth, and your job is not to soothe their anxiety. Your job is to protect your peace and require behavior that proves real change. When avoidants feel ignored, they often return with a test first. A breadcrumb protects their pride, and this keynote is crucial because it stops the viewer from mistaking a small reach out for a full return. Most people get trapped right here. They finally detach. They finally stop chasing the table's turn, and then the avoidant appears.
A reaction, a meme.
A random question. A late-night check-in. And because the viewer has been emotionally starving, that breadcrumb feels like a feast. Their nervous system floods with relief. Their heart says, this is it. And without realizing it, they hand back full access to someone who hasn't earned it. Ladies and gentlemen, a test is not intimacy, it's a temperature check. A test is designed to answer one question: do I still have access to you? Because access is what calms an avoidant when they feel uncertainty. If they can get you to respond, if they can get your warmth back, if they can confirm that you're still emotionally available, their anxiety drops immediately. And once their anxiety drops, the urgency that brought them back often disappears. That's why the first return is usually small. It's safer. It's deniable. It protects their pride. If you respond warmly, they win comfort without vulnerability. If you don't respond, they can tell themselves, I tried, without facing the deeper truth of rejection. This is why breadcrumbs are the avoidant's favorite move when the tables turn. It gives them maximum control with minimum risk. Now, what does a breadcrumb look like? It's anything that opens the door without walking through it. Hey, how are you? Long time. I saw something that reminded me of you. Are you mad? You okay? A like, a view, a reaction emoji. Something casual, something small, something that doesn't require accountability for what happened. And here is the hard truth. Breadcrumbs are often not about rebuilding the relationship. They're about rebuilding access. Because rebuilding the relationship would require honesty. It would require talking about the past. It would require owning the hurt. It would require change. A breadcrumb doesn't do any of that. A breadcrumb simply tests whether your heart is still open and whether the option still exists. So why do avoidants use tests instead of accountability? Because accountability is vulnerable, and vulnerability is what avoidants fear. An apology means they have to admit they were wrong. A real conversation means they have to sit with shame. Naming the hurt means they have to face impact, and facing impact can feel like being exposed. So the avoidant tries to return without stepping into the part that would make it real. They want the comfort without the consequence. They want the connection without the responsibility. They want you back in their orbit, but they don't want the discomfort of repair, so they test. Now the viewer needs to understand something that changes their life. Your response to the test decides whether the cycle resets. If you respond to the breadcrumb with full emotional access, long replies, instant forgiveness, immediate closeness, you remove the consequence that made them reach out in the first place. You calm their anxiety, you restore control. And once control is restored, many avoidants slip back into distance because distance becomes safe again. That's the reset. They return. You melt. They relax. Then they withdraw again. And you end up thinking, why did they come back if they weren't going to stay? Because the return was never about staying, it was about soothing. So what should you do when a breadcrumb arrives? You do not punish them, but you do not over-reward them. You respond with calm structure. Structure is what forces truth. Structure means you keep your dignity intact. Structure means you don't ignore your own needs to keep them comfortable. Structure means you move slow and ask for clarity. Instead of rushing into a conversation that pretends nothing happened, you can respond with something simple and grounded. I'm doing well. If you want to talk, I'm open to a real conversation, but I'm not going back to inconsistency. That one line changes everything because it turns the test into a choice. It invites maturity and blocks manipulation. If they are genuinely ready to reconnect, they will step into the clarity. They will respond with substance. They will acknowledge what happened. They will make effort. They will not disappear when you ask for respect. But if they only wanted to test access, they will often vanish or get defensive. They may say you're being cold. They may say you're overreacting. They may try to rush you. Why are you making it a big deal? Because they want the door open without the conversation. So this keynote keeps the viewer watching because it answers the most common fear. What do I do when they come back? And it gives them a clear rule. Don't chase a breadcrumb. Don't turn a test into a full reunion. Don't reward minimal effort with maximum access. Because if you do, you teach them that they can regulate their anxiety with you whenever they want, without changing. And here's the final truth of this keynote. If someone truly values you, they won't be offended by your standards. A person who wants intimacy will respect structure. They will understand that trust requires repair. They will not demand immediate access after causing distance. They will earn it, so when the avoidant tests the door, your job is not to prove your love. Your job is to protect your peace, your calm. Paced response is what reveals whether they're here for real connection or just here to confirm they still have you. Don't punish them, don't reward avoidance, respond with calm structure and require clarity and respect. And this keynote is the final payoff because it gives the viewer a way to handle the biggest moment, the moment the avoidant reappears. Most people think the hardest part is being ignored. It's not. The hardest part is what happens when the tables turn and they come back. Because that's where hope can make you betray yourself. Hope can make you forget the sleepless nights. Hope can make you accept crumbs as a meal. Hope can make you reopen the door without changing the rules. Ladies and gentlemen, calm structure is the difference between a glow-up and a relapse. Calm structure means you are not emotionally reactive, you are emotionally grounded. You don't attack them, you don't shame them, you don't pour out 20 paragraphs to finally explain what you deserve. You simply communicate like a person who knows their worth and knows their standards. You allow your boundaries to do the talking. Because the avoidance pattern survives on two things, your emotional availability and your emotional urgency. If you are available instantly and urgently, they can pull you back into the old rhythm. But if you are calm, paced, and clear, you break that rhythm. You remove the reward for avoidance. What does rewarding avoidance look like? It looks like responding to a breadcrumb like it's a breakthrough. It looks like letting them skip the hard conversation. It looks like intimacy being restored without accountability. It looks like you being so relieved to hear from them that you accept vague language and inconsistent effort. It looks like you treating their anxiety like love and soothing it with access. That teaches them, I can disappear, then return and nothing changes. And that lesson guarantees the cycle will repeat. So the first part of this keynote is mental discipline. You remind yourself attention is not repair. A message is not commitment. Curiosity is not consistency. Missing you is not choosing you. And if you let yourself be intoxicated by the return, you'll hand them the power again. Calm structure keeps the power where it belongs in your standards. Now let's define structure. Structure is clarity plus pacing plus boundaries. Clarity means you don't entertain vague hovering. If they reach out, you don't pretend nothing happened. You don't punish, but you do require reality. You can say something simple. I'm open to talking, but I'm not available for confusion. What are you reaching out for? That one question forces them out of games and into truth. A person who wants real connection will respect that. A person who wants control will hate it. Pacing means you don't reopen your whole heart on day one. You don't jump back into daily texting because they said hey. You don't return to emotional intimacy before trust is rebuilt. You keep your life full. You respond, but you don't over-respond. You stay warm, but you stay measured. Pacing is how you protect yourself from being pulled back into the high-low addiction of hot and cold love. Boundaries mean you decide what is acceptable now. You don't negotiate your basic needs. If they disappear again, you don't chase again. If they avoid accountability, you don't argue for it. You simply step back. Boundaries are not ultimatums. Boundaries are consequences you control. They are the rules of your access. Now, requiring clarity and respect is where the tables stay turned. Respect means your needs are not punished. Respect means your questions are not treated like pressure. Respect means communication doesn't vanish when the conversation gets real. Respect means they don't get to accuse you of being cold, simply because you're no longer on demand. Respect means you're not gaslit for asking for consistency. So what should the viewer actually say in real words when the avoidant comes back? Here's the tone: calm, short, grounded. I'm open to a real conversation, but I'm not going back to inconsistency. If you want to reconnect, it has to be clear and respectful. That's it. No begging. No threats. No long emotional speech. You put the standard on the table and you watch what they do. Because their response will reveal their intentions. If they step into it, if they communicate, if they take responsibility, if they show effort over time, there may be room for something healthier. If they get defensive, if they vanish, If they try to rush you back into comfort without repair, then you have your answer. They don't want intimacy, they want access. They want the old version of you, the one who would soothe them and accept crumbs. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why we say don't punish them, but don't reward avoidance. Punishment keeps you emotionally tied and resentful. Reward keeps you trapped and hopeful. Structure keeps you free and clear. It lets you remain kind without being used, open without being naive, compassionate without abandoning yourself. And here's the deeper payoff. The tables turning is not about making an avoidant suffer. It's about you finally experiencing what a secure nervous system feels like. A secure nervous system doesn't chase. A secure nervous system doesn't beg for clarity. A secure nervous system doesn't interpret breadcrumbs as love. A secure nervous system requires behavior that matches words. So if they truly care, they will meet you in clarity and respect. If they don't, your structure will protect you from being pulled back into the same cycle. Because the real victory is not that they feel ignored. The real victory is that you stop ignoring yourself. And the moment you stop ignoring yourself, your life stops revolving around whether someone chooses you today. Your life starts revolving around whether someone is worthy of you, consistently.